It's time for another build video! Hello and welcome, come in, come in. But before we begin actually, let's take a brief moment of silence for all the players the game has lost. About this build, it's not going to be something special or unique, because mod 16 made sure of that. Alright then, let's jump right into it guys! The best in slot race is still the Dragonborn. The previous 3% power buff now becomes 3% more damage across the board. This buff puts the race clearly above others. The Metallic Ancestry Dragonborn is slightly better due to the 3% HP buff. Up next is Half Orc, 5% critical severity, and the bonus ability scores align with the Ranger's DPS build. All the other races are not as good. However, just like I said before in my past build videos, it's not a big deal if you choose whatever you want your character to be, best in slot or not. Here, I like Halfling, and that's what he's always going to be. Strength is now the primary and most important ability score for increasing Ranger's damage. Second is Dexterity for critical severity, and third is Charisma, in that order. By the way, we can no longer roll for a random set of ability scores, which are now determined strictly by class. Yeah. So, why melee and not range? Well, because I'm terrible with the bow. Look. Alright, back to the build video. As I was saying, for ability scores, strength and dexterity all the way, mod 16 made them less effective, especially strength for physical classes, and intelligence for magical. This has an impact on the choice of artifact equipment sets, which I will get to shortly. For powers, our new go-to melee at will is now Storm Strike for single target and the good old Clear the Ground for AoE. I'm not sure why plant growth damage was severely nerfed, while leaving the long cooldown intact. It went from one of the best melee encounters to one of the worst. Anyway, when choosing the encounters, we want to go for high magnitude and low cooldown. 3 of them are clearly better than the other choices, and they are the ones I recommend to use as a melee warden. Hindering Strike, Marauder's Rush, and Boar Charge. For daily, the only one we should really be using is the new Call of the Storm. You can put whatever in the other slot. For class feature, Seeker's Vengeance should always be slotted, as long as you can get behind the target of course, which is the case with all the new enemies in mod 16. The other one should be Twin Blade Storm for AoE and Blade Storm for single target, or Aspect of the Pack if your combat advantage isn't capped yet. On to the feats. The first one, Focused, is quite powerful. Because of it, the melee warden should rarely switch to range stance. Storm's Recovery for a very reliable cooldown reduction. Blade Hurricane for enhancing our melee at wills. Skirmisher's Gambit for a general damage increase. And lastly, Enhanced Conductivity. All of these choices should be pretty easy to make because the alternatives are quite bad in comparison. Before I get to the gears, let's start with the enchantments first. Dark for companion influence and 1 Quartermaster for farming RP. Demonic, Draconic, or Brutal go into the defense slots. Some may say Radiant, but I think we should try to stack some defensive stats. other than just HP for future changes. Black Death or Bark Shield for armor enchantment. I use a mix of Radiant and Black Ice and one Tenebrous for offense. Radiant and Black Ice are two enchantments with the highest power, for obvious reason. You may have heard that it is easy to cap stats. Well, it's actually not if you use all level 70 hunt gears, which are currently best in slot over the new level 80 ones. Lastly, best in slot weapon enchantment is Vorpal, hands down. Armor Reinforcement Kit. Power goes on the left side gears, and combat advantage goes on the right side gears. +1, of course. For gears, start with the Spy Guild hood, then later upgrade it to Protege. Mermaid, Soup Bowl for other areas outside of Undermountain is a good option. I myself tend to just stick with the Protege's hood though. Fewer Kuno of the Bear for armor. The best in slot gloves are Fear Bringers, followed by Terror Grips and Primal. Yes, Fear Bringers reduce daily powers by 30%, but it is definitely worth it. Allow me to show you why that is real quick. Our main daily power, Call of the Storm, grants lightning enchanted weapon for 10 seconds. This particular buff itself is not always considered a daily power. From this test, the lightning enchanted weapon became an at-will because I used Storm Strike to proc it. In conclusion, lightning enchanted weapon's type of power, be it at-will, encounter, or daily, depends on the power that procs it. We've seen this same type of mechanic before with the Trapper Feat, Thorn Roots, when they used to benefit from encounter damage buffs and the critical severity from the Dread enchantment. For weapons, go for the Alabaster. The Watcher set is not really worth the time and effort, unless you don't have anything else to grind for. The main hand at-will modification goes to clear the ground. It really should be Storm Strike, but that one is bugged and doesn't work for now. I put my Tenebrous here. This enchantment now has a damage cap. At rank 15, 300,000 HP is needed to reach the maximum damage of 24,000, which can only proc once per second. Even then, it is better than any other enchantment in a single slot, and I don't recommend to use more than that. For offhand modification, critical severity for utility, and power for rating. For feat, Heels of Fury are best in slot, followed by Boots of the Wild. Now we get to the artifact equipment set. Despite the stealth nerf of removing the AP gain from the neck and cutting the ability scores in half, the Orgus set is still the best in slot. Daily powers were not a big thing for the Ranger class before Mod 16, and they still are not. Earlier in the video I talked about how ability scores are not as effective as they once were. Well, the second part of the nerf on the Orca set is not too bad. The set bonus is really that strong, especially when enemies don't die as quickly as they used to. The Shadow Stalker rings are yet another old gear that retains the best in slot status. If you don't have a +5, get the Ebonized Assault ring and switch out Heels of Fury or the Fury Kuno for something else, because the 3% melee buff is capped at 2 stacks. Ebony stained red shirt for shirt, and for trousers, choose from any of the protege that has the defensive stats you like. As for me, I go for defense and deflection. Artifacts. The primary one should be the Decanter of Attribute Essence. Alternatively, for AoE, the Barbarian Sigil can buff for 6% more damage. The duration is set to 18 seconds as long as you hit a target, despite what the tooltip says. For secondary artifacts, one is locked by the Shard of Orcus Wand. For those of you that managed to get the Storyteller's Journals from the time-limited Tales of Old event, slot them, for they are best in slot. If you don't have them, go for the new Trobriand's Ring and Staff of Flowers instead. On the surface, the Storyteller's Journals seem to give less than the level 80 artifacts. However, because of the 2 set bonuses, the journals are ultimately better. When 2 or more are equipped, each one gives 1000 more power, 10,000 more HP, and +1 to all ability scores. When the next Tales of Old event comes around, the third part of the 2 set bonuses can be unlocked, which contains the Lost Mouth and the Black Eye set bonus. To calculate bonus ability scores into power, I'm going to refer to a website which I think many of you are familiar with. Here we are once again at Jane's website. Thankfully, she updated the power to damage increase graph by the time I decided to make this build video. Strength for the ability score that directly increases our damage, and the number 2 comes from having 2 journals equipped. In my case, I get a bit less power from 2 journals than from Trobriand's Ring and Staff of Flowers. For all the other extra benefits from the Storyteller's Journal set bonuses, they are best in slot, in my opinion. While we're here, let's take a look at why the Ohan gears are better than most of the level 80 ones. This means that the level 80 gears, such as the Successor, have to have at least this much more power than the Ohan gears to be better. The more power you have, the better the Ohan gears become. Stronghold Boons. Power for offense, HP or defense for defense. If you follow my build, you should have your defense capped and enough HP to max out rank 15 Tenebrous damage. For utility, consider using Revived Sickness when running in dungeon to mitigate negative effects of Revived Sickness. Mouse speed for obvious reason. Campaign Boons. The good ones to choose are Power, HP, Combat Advantage, Movement Speed, and Companion Influence. Any remaining spare points should be used to cap offensive stats. I put more points than needed into Armor Penetration for when I'm running older dungeons with my stats scaled down. For Tier 5, even with the Storm's Recovery feat, pick Recovery Speed to decrease the gap between each flurry in the rotation. The other choice should be Critical Severity. For Master Boons, choose either Deathly Rage or Bloodlust. In general, Deathly Rage is better in short fights and Bloodlust in longer fights. I lean more towards Deathly Rage because of the percentage buff, which is very powerful as we know it. Companion. Augment is once again the meta, and among them, Bullet Pop is considered best in slot because it is the only one that has both power and combat advantage as its enhancement stat. After that would be any augment with either power or combat advantage. For me personally, I go with the Red Dragon Ironstone for the same reason I am a halfling and not an Uglyborn, Dragonborn. For those of you that dislike augments and can live with lower stats, there are a couple good non-augment companions in my opinion. The stalwart Golden Lion for its 10% damage mitigation, and a small extra damage buff from its roar. The other one is your Jimbo. Well, debuffs were removed from companion skills for balance, I guess. Somehow, Yojimbo's 10% debuff was unnerved. While I don't recommend you to spend resources on it, if you already have this guy all maxed out prior to month 16, go ahead and take advantage of his debuff before the nerf bat finds its way to him once again. Bonding Runestone is a must and a priority upgrade. Companion gears. I use an O+5 heroic, plated belt, and a choke chain. I made a mistake of missing out on the pearl ring from the expedition into Terminus. If you have it, I suggest you use that instead of the plated belt, and adjust your defense stat accordingly. Companion equip powers. Select potency for the enhancement. For offense, I recommend Deep Crow Hatchling, Stalldorf, and Velociraptor, which is currently bugged and gives the full benefit all the time. Even when it's fixed, I think it's worth keeping around because more people will have already gotten it due to this highly beneficial bug. For defense, Minstrel is the only companion in this lot to give 4k power at Legendary. Alternatively, I use the Ironstone of Allure, which I already have it at Legendary, and I think it is worth trading 2k power for 10% incoming healing. For utility, the top 3 choices are Mercenary, Barbarian Shaman, and Storm Rider. If you already have your combat advantage capped, then Storm Rider is for you. Mount. For combat power, either Swarm or T-Rex. Swarm is single target only, while T-Rex is AoE, but it can miss and eat the target instead when unintentionally used on a lowly minion. For equip power, can't go wrong with more power, but if you're still lacking some other offensive stats, you can apply a quick fix here, assuming you already have the corresponding mount that is. About the insignia set bonuses, each copy of the same bonus is now half as effective as the previous one, up to 2 times. This means that we can stack the same set bonus for a total of 3 times only. Stable. For the purpose of stacking power as high as possible, go for the Dominus insignias, which are currently only available in the form of Regal, Illuminated, and Barb. For other types of insignia, you can go for Brutality, but at the moment, getting them at Legendary is way too expensive due to low supply. I recommend the skill type to help capping combat advantage instead. I stacked 2 of Combatant's Maneuvers to help capping combat advantage, as well as for slotting more best-in-slot Dominus insignias. 1 Assassin's Covenant to convert my extra defense into offensive stats, so I can equip more Radiant Enchantments in offense slots. 1 Gladiator Scowl and 1 Barbarian's Revelry. If you have enough combat advantage, then double up on Gladiator Scowl or Barbarian's Revelry instead. In my build, Hindering Strike, Boar Charge, and Swarm can all proc Combatant's Maneuver. However, against control immune targets such as the bosses, only Boar Charge and Swarm would work. Here, let me do a quick test just to confirm that stacking 2 of combatants' maneuvers is working as I described earlier. For items, after a massive removal/nerf of the sources of buff and debuff in the game, Doohickey becomes a great source of damage. This little thing scales with power and is affected by critical severity when it crits, as well as combat advantage. Healing potion or stone of health in case you need it. Alliance Battlehorn gives a nice chunk of power, and it also generates AP similar to the AP gain cloaks. Due to the long cooldown though, it should only be used in boss fights. Another good option is the Empowered Chain of Scales. So, what are these stat cap I've been talking about? Well, power has no cap as usual, and this is where you dump your extra points into. For combat advantage, 110k is the cap for level 80 zones, and 118k for the new endgame dungeon, Lair of the Mad Mage. For armor penetration, critical strike, and accuracy, it is 60k for the level 80 zones and 68k for Lair of the Mad Mage. Because we focus more on offensive stats as a DPS, our defensive stats are unlikely to be capped. With that being said, I recommend to at least cap defense, which is 60k for level 80 zones and 68k for Lair of the Mad Mage. For this last part, here is my ACT data of a Lair of the Mad Mage run for my console players that don't have this handy tool. The majority of my melee Warden's damage will be coming from at-wills and encounters. Daily, on the other hand, is minimal, which is why Fearbringers are really best in slot for me. As you can see, a large portion comes from Doohickey, so get yours today. Then there's Tenebrous. On average is 3%. Slotting more than one did not change this number for me. And that is all for this build video. The rotation and how to play guide will be in another video. That's just how we do things around here. Thank you for watching, guys, especially those of you who have been patiently waiting for me to update my build. See you guys later, and remember to have fun. Bye!